So a professor at the University of Miami School of Law wrote an op-ed in the Boston Globe where she suggests redoing the First and Second Amendment and then gives an example of how these amendments should be written. I have my feelings about her opinions on the First Amendment, but because this is a 2A channel and I'm a 2A advocate, I'm going to focus exclusively on what she says about the Second Amendment. First, she claims that both amendments
inspire religious-like fervor in many Americans and are deeply flawed in their respective conceptualization.
Of course, the Second Amendment inspires religious-like fervor. We're talking about the ability to effectively defend your life, with the operative word being effectively. If there's anything that the American people should have religious-like fervor about, it's protecting life. She goes on to say that
these two amendments are highly susceptible to being read in isolation from the Constitution as a whole and from its commitments to equality and the collective good, and that the two amendments tend to be interpreted in aggressively individualistic ways that ignore the reality of conflict among competing rights.
This is nothing more than intellectual babble to say that she personally doesn't like guns, so no one should be able to use them for their protection because it offends her individualized sensibilities, which is ironic considering how she tries to vilify these two amendments by saying that
they are interpreted in aggressively individualistic ways that ignore the reality of conflict among competing rights.
With competing rights meaning her individual feelings. She then says that the result of this
is that the most powerful members of society benefit from these rights at the expense of vulnerable groups.
Someone want to explain to me how an amendment that says the people have the individual right to use arms to protect themselves and this country only benefits the most powerful members of society at the expense of vulnerable groups? The Second Amendment doesn't exclude any particular group. It literally says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So unless there's some Illuminati version of the Second Amendment that only gives this right to some amorphous group of powerful people, this just sounds like intellectual gaslighting where you try to convince people that they're a victim of their Second Amendment rights and that the only way to truly be safe is to give up the right to bear arms. So let's see how she says the Second Amendment should be worded. So before she actually says what her Second Amendment should be, she starts with this preamble, I guess.
The Second Amendment's idiosyncratic and anachronistic focus on militias and arms degrades the concept of self-defense. The right to safeguard one's life should not be conflated with or reduced to the right to use a weapon, especially a weapon that is so much more likely to inflict injury and death than to avoid it. Far better would be an amendment that guarantees a meaningful right to bodily autonomy and obligates the government to implement reasonable measures to protect public health and safety.
I want you to imagine someone telling you that a focus on cars degrades the concept of free travel, or that the focus on the internet degrades the concept of free speech. You would think that this person was an idiot. That's exactly what she's saying when she says
the Second Amendment's idiosyncratic and anachronistic focus on militias and arms degrades the concept of self-defense.
In what intellectual reality of any level of competence does not focusing on the most effective tool to accomplish a goal degrade it as a concept? The reason the Second Amendment conflates safeguarding one's life with guns is because the best way to safeguard your life in a situation when someone is trying to take it is with a gun. And the Second Amendment doesn't reduce the right to safeguard life to arms. It protects the people's right to own them because the founders knew that would be the first thing a tyrannical government would try to take away from the people. Because that's why the Second Amendment was written, to give the people the means to fight back against a tyrannical government. You want to give the government even more power by removing the guns and obligating the government to implement reasonable measures to protect public safety. But what happens when the people need protection? From the government. It's been firmly established that more people use guns to defend themselves from attacks than use against them. So that whole
more likely to inflict injury and death
statement is nonsense. But let's see what she believes the Second Amendment should actually say.
All people have the right to bodily autonomy consistent with the right of other people to the same, including the right to defend themselves against unlawful force and the right of self-determination in reproductive matters. The government shall take reasonable measures to protect the health and safety of the public as a whole.
The only reason we have a right to bear arms in this country is because it was explicitly codified in our Constitution. Without the Second Amendment, there is no legal protection to our right to own firearms. She literally took out the word arms for this very reason. She understands that without explicitly stating arms, there would be nothing to stop the government from banning guns outright. And that's what she wants. The Second Amendment is a thorn in the side of anti-gunners. They claim to respect the Second Amendment, but they don't. They hate it because it literally protects the one thing they want to do away with: Guns in the hands of the people. The Second Amendment doesn't protect guns. It protects your right to keep and bear them. The Second Amendment single-handedly protects the greatest power the people have, because without the Second Amendment, the Constitution is merely a suggestion. Her version of the Second Amendment literally means nothing. This is a version of the Second Amendment that reads like it was written by a child trying to shoehorn their abortion ideology into an amendment focused on the preservation of life and free country. And depending on where you fall on the issue of abortion, the irony is blinding, if not astonishing. Simply saying people have a right to defend themselves against unlawful force means nothing if you don't have the means to exact an adequate form of defense. I have the right to defend myself against a person trying to kill me with a gun. But if I don't have a gun to defend myself with against that person, my right to self-defense is just words on paper. They mean nothing. So, with that being said, as far as I'm concerned, her version of the Second Amendment is trash. Respectfully. Guns aren't political. That's why I need your help getting this message to spread on YouTube by clicking the thumbs up button, leaving a comment to let me know what you think of the video, then subscribing to the channel. But most importantly, click that bell symbol. For products featured in this video, click the links in the description.